Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my light beside the golden door. Emma Lazarus.
You know, it goes without saying that I am a firm believer that when we allow God to guide us in our lives, we can't go wrong. God sends us in the right direction. Now, of course, all of us, myself included, have those times when we're stubborn and we want to do things our way. And so we do. But God has this amazing way of showing us how his plan is perfect. Now, you all know, when it comes to preaching, I'm a planner. And so generally, I will plan my preaching schedule out quarterly, sometimes out as much as 6 months. So in February, I'm sitting down and I'm looking at my preaching calendar. I say, okay, so what am I going to do toward the end of the second quarter, going into the third quarter during the summer? And God told me to focus on these hot button issues. And so I had this long list of hot button issues that I knew it would be impossible, totally impossible for me to preach on all of those issues. But I also realized that some of those issues, while they were cultural issues, they really didn't have much of a biblical component to them. And so I was able to narrow that list down. And then I looked at my schedule, vacations, and everything that's going on. And so when am I going to preach about what? And so I put all of that into dates and then made my determination as to what subject I was going to be preaching on. And of course, you know, we've already covered race, culture, and ethnicity. We've covered life, faith, and politics. Little did I know, though, that when I chose this particular day to preach about the subject of immigration, how timely that subject was going to be. I have absolutely nothing to do with that, though. That was God's providence. He knew that in our nation, right now would be a timely time to talk about this subject, and specifically where we as Christians, where we as the people of God should stand on this issue. That poem that you heard at the beginning, it's called The New Colossus. It's by Emma Lazarus, and it is located somewhere on the Statue of Liberty. It is an ideal. And the reason that I point that out is because ideals are things that we strive toward, not things that necessarily we have achieved. The United States has an ideal, and we strive toward that ideal. We have not reached that ideal. As Christians, as people of God, we have an ideal that we strive towards in the way that we live our life. We have not reached it, but we strive toward it. And that's important to understand, because when you listen to those words, give me your tired, give me your poor, give me your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, you realize that while we have strived towards those words, we have not totally achieved them, nor that I don't know that we ever will totally. And there may be some of you, especially younger, and especially if you haven't studied history that will think, you will look at our situation that we're in our country today in terms of the issue of immigration, and you will think this is something totally new. But no, it is not. We in our country have gone through periods of ups and downs in immigration on this issue as a country. And as Christians, we have had our ups and downs. Some of you here, I don't know all of your heritage. Some of you might have Irish heritage. And some of your relatives may have immigrated here. In the late 19th or early 20th century, were you an Irish immigrant, especially on the East Coast, and you were looking for a job, you might have seen this sign. Help wanted, no Irish need to apply. If you are of Asian descent, especially on the West Coast, not totally, late 19th, early 20th century, you might have seen this. Help wanted, no Chinese need to apply. Now, what we have to determine and understand as Christians is that this issue for us is both straightforward, because you're going to see that God has specifically told us how we should behave, and it's complicated. And why is that? Well, the reason that it's complicated is because when we look at ourselves as a nation, we understand that immigration has been a strength of our nation. As those immigrants in the early 20th century and late 19th century were coming in on ships, and they were seeing that Statue of Liberty, and they came in and they worked hard and they helped to build a nation. We understand that immigration has been an important part of our national identity. But we also have to admit that immigration has a tendency in the beginning to have a negative effect on the least amongst us. It tends to have a negative effect on those that are lowest on the socioeconomic standing and status, because a lot of times when immigration takes place, those are the jobs that are being competed for. So we have to admit both of those things. And you say, but they don't balance. Well, that's true, but both are true. We are a nation of immigrants. We are a nation that has gained our strength from that immigration. There are downsides, however. So as we look through a Christian lens at this issue, we are going to have to look at three facts. Three very important facts. And the third fact, the last one, is the most important fact. First fact, the United States is a nation. Nations have to have certain things. They have to have laws, they have to have borders, and they have to have a national identity. And we have all of those things. We have laws, and in having laws, you have to be willing to follow those laws. From a Christian standpoint, we have to be willing to follow laws that are just. We have to follow laws that do not go against what God has told us to do, but we are called to follow laws. We'll get into that a lot more when we talk about faith in government in August. We have borders, and we have a national identity. Now, the reason that this is important, and this will come up again, is because as a nation, there are people within our nation, there is a government within our nation that makes laws and that enforces borders, and that's their job. Remember, that's their job. And the reason that's important is because it's not your job. And that's going to come out a little bit later. The next thing that is a fact is that immigrants are people. And any civilized society has got to make a determination that we're going to be at this level of how we treat people, and we're not going to go below that, because that is against who we are as a people. Any civilization is going to have to make that determination. And when you make that determination, then you also understand that regardless of national origin, that immigrant is a human being. They are a person, and we are determined that we are not going to go below this level in how we treat people. Any civilization has to do that. Number three, Our faith tells us how to treat immigrants. Now, when we look at the nation of Israel, they didn't have a border patrol. They didn't have an immigrations and customs agents. But they did have the law. First 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, those are the books of the law. And what I found with many people who do Bible study, they will read Genesis, they may read the first 20 chapters or so of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, they don't read it all. With good understanding, it's a lot of rules. Do this way, do this way. But within those rules, God has expressed to the nation of Israel, this is how you are supposed to treat immigrants. This is how you're supposed to treat people who are not of the nation of Israel. And in doing that, God not only gave Israel a blueprint, he gave us as Christians a blueprint of how we are supposed to treat immigrants. Now, again, we are not talking about legal status here. We're going to get into that a little bit, but we are talking about specifically our role as Christians. So let's see what God had to say to the nation of Israel. So he starts out, this is the text that was read earlier, the Old Testament. As a stranger dwells with you, how should we treat them? You shall not mistreat them. Now, I want you to notice the word there, shall. That is a command. You will not mistreat these people. This is what he is saying to the nation of Israel. They're going to be foreigners. They're going to be aliens within your land. And when they're there, you shall not mistreat them. How should you treat them? The stranger that dwells among you shall be as one that is born among you. In other words, you treat them just like you would treat anyone else, and you shall love him as yourself. In other words, you treat that person with respect, you treat them with love, you treat them as if they are a part of your family. And then he goes on to say, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And in doing that, what he is trying to get the nation to understand and remember is the place that they were in. Remember that your ancient relative, Joseph, was the second most powerful person in Egypt, and he goes to Pharaoh and he says, this is my family. And what does Pharaoh do? Pharaoh says, well, come on in. He basically does the ancient version of the Emma Lazarus poem. He says, well, come on, bring your family in. Now, this wasn't done just totally without restrictions. He sent them to a specific place in Egypt because their customs and their culture was different from the Egyptian culture, but he did welcome them in. And God is saying, remember that. Remember that that happened. He's also saying, remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Remember how you were treated. Remember what that made you feel like. And then when you remember that and you have a stranger in your land, don't mistreat them. Some of you may have been in instances when you were in the minority, when you were the one who was different. How did that make you feel? Remember that feeling, and then make sure you don't treat anyone else that way. Amen? But God also gets kind of specific on this issue. Our other Leviticus passage talks about the harvest. It says, when you reap the harvest in your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field. When you reap, nor shall you gather the gleanings of the harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I can give you a mental picture of what God was trying to do here. When you leave here, you go out the door right here and you turn to your left, you look across the street, there's a cornfield there. Eventually that cornfield is going to be harvested. Now, in modern times, it's going to be harvested by machines. It's going to be mechanized. But in the old days, that wasn't what you did. What you did was you got a bunch of people together, they got their sacks, and they went through and they harvested. In the process of doing that, they would drop things. And what they would drop would be called the gleanings. So what God is saying here is two things. First of all, don't harvest the entire field. Don't go all the way to the corners. You leave that. And what you drop, don't go back, because sometimes what people would do is they go back and they go through the field a second time, picking up what they dropped. God says, no, don't do that. Leave those corners and leave that gleaning, that stuff that you drop, leave that for the poor. Leave that for the stranger. Because you see, as human beings, we have some basic needs. We need food, we need water, we need clothing, we need shelter, and we need security. And those are the basic needs. Everything else is extra. And God is saying, let's see to that need of food by making sure that after the harvest, people can come behind you and they can pick up those gleanings and have something to eat. He's take care of people. Love people, respect people. So the question is, what is God trying to say to us today? We're not in the same type of culture. Of course, in the Middle East, there is still this culture of hospitality, especially in the tribal areas. You go into those areas and someone takes you into their home, they're going to feed you, they're going to clothe you, they're going to make sure that you have your basic needs taken care of, and they will protect you, so they provide for security. That's still a big part of Middle Eastern tribal culture. But you say that's not the culture today where we are. Well, that might be the case, but God is making it very specific and very clear as to how we should be handling this. We as Christians do not ask for immigration status. We do not ask, we do not care about where you are from. If there is a need, we as Christians are called to meet that need. If someone is hungry, it doesn't matter whether they were born in Stillwell, Guatemala, Mexico City. It doesn't matter. We are called to meet the need and to make sure that hungry person is fed. If a person is thirsty or they are in need of medicine, they're sick, they are in need of clothing or shelter, we as Christians are not called to say, well, but what is your documentation? Are you here legally? We're called to make sure that that person has a roof over their head, that they have water, that if they need medicine, they have medicine. If they need medical attention, they have medical attention. If they need shelter, they get shelter, and they get security. We don't care about the rest. That is irrelevant to us. Now, some are thinking, yeah, I hear what you're saying, Pastor, but... And I'll tell you, I write a blog, and there's a blog on there saying no more buts. But here we go. But, Pastor, I hear what you're saying. But what about those people that have come across the border illegally? What about those people who are coming and they don't mean us well? They mean to do harm. Now, I will say this. As Christians, we are also not called to be blind. We cannot, and we know intuitively that everyone who comes does not have good intentions. Everyone is not looking for a job. Everyone is not going to be a hard worker. There are people who come that have bad and ill intentions. Guess what? Not for us to worry about. Remember, I said earlier that one of the facts is that governments have borders and that they have laws. And part of having borders and having laws is that we have people who it is their job to try and deal with that. We have customs agents, we have border patrol, we have immigration agents, we have law enforcement. That is their job to figure that out. It is not what we as Christians are called to do. What does the text say? Don't mistreat, treat as if they're one of your own, and love others. And that can be a hard lesson to learn, but it is what God has called for us to do. Amen? That being said, say, well, how do you handle it? You know, there's somebody here and maybe you suspect that they're here illegally, but what should we do? What do they need? Don't you think that we should call law enforcement? Well, I'll ask you this. You go out on 69 today and you're driving up 69, and of course all of you are law-abiding citizens, so you're driving the speed limit. And as you're driving the speed limit, 70 miles an hour in some places, somebody comes shooting past you at about 78. That person is breaking the law. Are you going to get on your phone and call the sheriff or the Overland Park Police Department? No. You're going to assume that at some point they are going to do their job and that will be taken care of. It's not that we support the breaking of laws. It's just that is not our primary focus when it comes to this issue. Our primary focus is to make sure that people live. Amen? Amen. So that being said, we also have to understand that it is also our duty as Christians to follow just laws. And that's where it can be hard sometimes. When I was back in Michigan, we had a young lady who came into the country 100% legally. She was on a work visa. When that job went away. And the way immigration law works is once the job, the sponsoring company is no longer sponsoring you, or you no longer have that job, you have a certain amount of time to find another sponsor and to find another job, or you have to leave the country. This young lady could not find another sponsor. She didn't find another job, so she overstayed her visa. At that point, now, she is no longer a legal occupant of the country, she's an illegal occupant of the country. She fell on hard times, and so she needed food, she needed some clothes, she needed some shelter, and our church helped her. She came in, she became a part of our church family. She started to associate with some people that she shouldn't associate with. Now, she never broke any laws, but through her association with these people, she got on the radar of ICE agents, and she was eventually taken into custody. Now, we had a lawyer in our congregation that understood immigration law, and so he did everything that he could to help her, but it was eventually determined through the courts that she would be deported back to her home country. None of us wanted that to happen. We didn't want her to leave. But the law, and it was a just law, said she had to go home. So what did we do? We threw a party, we had a good time, we hugged, we cried, and she went back home. Because that is what had to happen. And that can be difficult. But notice what happened. What did we do as Christians? We took care of her needs. We loved her. We did not mistreat her. But when the time came and the court said, you've got to go back home, we stood with that decision. Now, there are caveats. What if she was being sent back to a place where we knew that her life would be in danger? What if she was being sent back to a place where she could potentially have been harmed? Well, then each of us as individual Christians and each of us as churches has got to make a decision as to how we're going to handle that situation. Because now the question is the situation just? But in this particular situation, there was no question. It was just. We just didn't like it. But we had to follow it. The bottom line is that I'm going to assume, see, I'm saying this and making an assumption right now, but as far as I know, we don't have any ICE agents, we don't have any Border Patrol agents, we may have some law enforcement or prior law enforcement, but for the most part, us as Christians, our job is not enforcement of immigration law. Our job is to be the Christians that God has called us to be. And the text tells us, do not mistreat. The text tells us, treat those individuals, regardless of who they are, as one of our own. When we look at the Matthew text, which was read, the New Testament, it says that, and when all of this is over, and this is important, you want to think about this. It says when all of this is over, Jesus returns, he's going to separate people just like a shepherd separates sheep from goats. And he's going to look at one group of people and he's going to say, come and enter into heaven, because when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was tired, you took me in. When I was sick, you gave me medicine. When I was in prison, you visited me. And they go, well, wait a minute, I don't remember that. What do you mean? I don't remember seeing you sick. I don't remember seeing you hungry. I don't remember seeing you thirsty. I don't remember seeing you in prison. And God's response is, whatever you did to the least of these, you also did to me. And regardless of where a person comes from, regardless of where they were born, that is still a creation of God. Amen. And if they are hungry, we feed them. If they are thirsty, we give them something to drink. If they are homeless, we find them shelter. If they are sick, we find them medicine, because that is a child of God. God does not recognize national borders. And when it comes to helping God's people, neither should we. And the people of God said, Amen.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my light beside the golden door. Emma Lazarus,